Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Brian Driscoll here, Vince Adair right there. We're going to dive right in. The college football playoff rankings have been released. And Vince, I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, this is probably the most head-scratching initial top 25 I've seen. And, man, there was a lot. I mean, there's always kind of like, oh, wow, that surprises me. There were some that were just flat out ridiculous. And we're going to dive into all of it. But I want to start off by talking about Notre Dame at 10. We talked today during our show, Vince, that we had Notre Dame. You had them 8. I had them 9. We agreed that they were going to be in that 8 to 10 range. Obviously started at number 10. There's enough on their schedule in front of them to, and then what happens in front that they can easily climb up from 10 to 4. I think right now it's just kind of focusing on sort of chipping away at one team at a time. I think Wake Forest is going to catch an L soon. Michigan, one of the 3 Big Ten teams, is eventually going to fall behind them because they play each other so much.
Sure.
You look at some of these other things. So they're going to have opportunities to climb up for Notre Dame. The key is being in the top 10 to start. If you're in the top 10 to start, then striking distance. And I think that's the key for me. So if you're someone who does want to see Notre Dame in the college football playoff, and I always want to see Notre Dame in the playoff, this isn't the best place you could have started in your circumstance, but it's also
Right.
You could have had a situation where they just said, hey, Baylor and Oklahoma State both have better wins. And so, but I think them having Wisconsin at number, I got to find it here. I couldn't believe this. That Wisconsin being at number 21 was a huge boost for Notre Dame, in my opinion. And I think it helped Michigan as well. But 10 is not the best spot, but it's a good starting point if you're going to try to make a playoff run.
Well, and the top 12 are exactly what we said the top 12 were going to be. They're just all jostled around. I mean, in very interesting fashion. And obviously, we'll get to that. But for Notre Dame, when I saw 10, I was like, okay, I mean, that's fine because I think there's still going to be, and we talked about it this afternoon, there's still going to be all kinds of movement above them. And so as long as Notre Dame takes care of their own business, they're going to continue to move up. Whether they get to the top 4 or not, it's completely out of their control at this point. It's going to be what happens in other games. I mean, if they end up 11-1, they're going to be in great shape and they're going to have an opportunity depending on what everybody else does. And I think that's kind of what we anticipated. And that's kind of where we're at right now. And so them being 10, okay, that's fine. Whatever. Okay. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between Notre Dame being 8, 9, or 10 right now.
I agree with that. And, like we said, this was the sweet spot. I think the only thing that would have concerned me if I was Notre Dame is if they weren't ranked like in the top 10. If they would have fallen down to like 11 or 12 behind one of those Big 12 teams, because the committee has never really shown a whole lot of love to the Big 12 outside of Oklahoma. And then this year, they're not showing love to anybody in the Big 12, including Oklahoma.
Yeah, no doubt.
But Oklahoma will get their opportunity to jump up. They still have to play the number 11 and number 12 teams. But Notre Dame is in a position where if they just keep doing what they're doing. But I'll say this, the one thing that this has to if Brian Kelly cares at all about actually playing for a championship this year, like at all, he needs to have the mentality of these next 4 games, if we can put a 60 spot on somebody, we're going to put a 60 spot on somebody.
Absolutely.
Because, hey, that winning a championship is always more important than, whatever reasons that have him call off the dogs all the time, right?
Right.
If you don't have pedal to the metal for 60 minutes, and what I mean by that is if you put your backups in the game, like we saw last week with, Lincoln Riley puts, his backup quarterback in the game, and you know what he does? They're throwing the football still.
Exactly.
Put your backups in the game, and let them run the offense and run the defense, because
don't just run the ball between the tackles every single time.
If Notre Dame is going to have a chance to win, they can't just keep winning. Keep winning will get you to New Year's 6, right? And some fans are happy about that. I understand that. That's okay. But the head freaking coach at Notre Dame can't have that mentality. It needs to be about a championship, especially this year. So if you care at all, when you start at 10, you better go out there and just obliterate your last 4 opponents if you can. Now, they may not be good enough to do that. We'll find out.
Right.
But if you can, you need to obliterate them, right? And so, and when we talk about, because somebody just said final score isn't the eye test, it's part of it. And what we're talking about is this, though. It's not just about putting it like Wisconsin, beating Wisconsin 41-13. That's not a blowout, right? Because they are going to watch the game. We're talking about just pounding a team for 4 quarters, because if you whoop a team in the first half and then you call off the dogs in the second half and that team then it's not going to be an overly impressive win, because what's in the committee's mind? They didn't really play that well down the stretch. And you know how I know this? We saw this in 2015. Notre Dame dropped out of the top 4 despite winning games. Why? Because they won ugly. So how you win matters. That's a fact.
No doubt.
So, and it's not about running up the score. Everybody says it's not about running up the score. It's about not calling off the dogs. That's a different. Running up the score is running a fake punt on 4th and 5 when you're up 30.
Right.
Running a reverse or a flea flicker. Putting your backups in the game when you're up 42-10 and letting them run the offense and go down to score is not running it up. That's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Okay. So to me, they're going to have to do that. Because if they don't blow the next 4 teams out, I don't care what happens in front of them, they're not going to get in. Unless everybody else has 2 losses, they're going to have to whoop some people. Thoughts on that, Vince?
No, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you on that. I don't. Notre Dame needs to prove that they're a playoff team. And they haven't done that up to this point. And they're going to have an opportunity now that the College Football Committee is going to be focused on, games and how they're played and the outcomes. I mean, they're going to be in their rooms, or they're going to be watching all the games at the same time now. Now's the time to start impressing people. Because if you don't, you're going to be in a New Year's Six bowl, and that's fine. Right. And maybe that's where they end up anyway. But you at least got to put your name in the conversation by the way you play.
Right. Before we move on to some other things, here we go. Fat Fish with the super chat. Thank you for that. We have not seen you in a while. Sorry, I've been missing the live show. Been working on new music. Wish I could have made it to the tailgates. Love the content as always. Irish forever. Thank you very much for that super chat.
Thank you, Fat Fish.
So there's a lot. There's a lot to get to. The Notre Dame part, Vince, is not. It's not complicated. 10's not a great spot. It's not a bad spot. It's just it's in the range we thought. They got to blow people out, right? It's simple. Now, when you look at the rest of this, the biggest shocker to me was Oklahoma at 8.
Yeah.
Was a huge shock to me. That is absolute disrespect for Oklahoma. Now, I would have been okay Oklahoma not being in the top 4, but to have them at 8 behind, let me see how many teams that have lost games. There's 4 teams ahead of them that have lost games. And Oklahoma at 9-0 was ranked 8th behind Michigan.
Right.
That definitely surprised me.
Oh, that's a huge surprise. That's what surprised me the most, because as I looked at the rankings, because I didn't watch the show, I looked at the rankings on irishbreakdown.com, and I wasn't going to say that, but and I put the link in there in the chat, so everybody go over to irishbreakdown.com. That's where a nice clean look at the rankings, because you can't find it anywhere else right now. When I saw Alabama at 2, I was like, okay, well, Brian and I both had Oklahoma at 2, so where the heck are they? And to go all the way down to 8 is mind-blowing. I don't understand what Oklahoma did wrong to be ranked 8.
They were ranked 9th in 2019 with a loss.
Right. I don't – that one is just – for me, that's the craziest thing about this one. And there's some other things that I have an issue with, but the fact that Oklahoma is 8, 2 spots ahead of Notre Dame, okay? I really, really don't understand how and what their reasoning behind them being ranked 8th.
Yes, that was perplexing to say the least.
Yeah, so clearly they don't have a whole lot of respect for the Big 12.
Yeah,
and I get that. Is there even another Big 12 team? Yeah, there's not even another
11 and 12.
Baylor's at 12 and 11.
11. Okay, and Oklahoma State's and they play both of them.
Right, and so, we said they'd be 11 and 12.
Right.
We had that's where we had them, right?
Right. So Oklahoma will have plenty of as long as they win out, because again, they're going to have those 2 games plus Iowa State. And when I look at Iowa State's resume or a record right here, Vince, let me just pull this up here real quick. Iowa State is currently 5-3, and Iowa State before they play Oklahoma, I just want to see what they have left on their schedule. They have Texas this weekend, then at Texas Tech before they play Oklahoma.
Okay.
If you're an Oklahoma fan, you are rooting hardcore for Iowa State to win the next 2 games because
No
that
doubt.
would make them 7-3 and jump them into the top 25.
They would absolutely be in the top. I mean, because right now, okay, I know what I'm going off course here a little bit, but the fact that there's 2 3-loss teams in the rankings right now is ridiculous. Number one,
Yes,
and the fact that Mississippi State's all the way to 17 is even more ridiculous. 3 losses, and you're 17th.
right.
That just doesn't make any sense to me. 0.
Right, and a pair of 1-loss American Athletic Conference teams, Houston and SMU,
not
ranked.
Right.
That to me was, I mean,
But
it's almost
San
like
Diego State is ranked
with yes, right. It to me that was one of the things that the lack of respect for the AAC was puzzling to me. Especially since look when you look at SMU, okay, they lost to Houston, right? That's going to lead me to another point here, but they've got to win on the road against a Big 12 team, right? I mean, I don't know what else you expect them to do. Houston, I understand because Houston lost to Texas Tech in the opener, and they don't have any Power 5 wins. I get that, but that was one of my other concerning things, Vince, is for the first time ever, I look at these rankings and say there's a lot of recency bias in this.
Yes,
and normally that's reserved for the AP and voters and things like that. But normally the committee does a really good job. And even the chair guy that talked about, I'm trying to remember the team he was referring to. They haven't Cincinnati. He was like, well, the last couple of games they haven't played well. And it's like, so like you look at some of the decisions that to me speak to recency bias, having a 5-3 Mississippi State team over a 6-2 Kentucky team. The only justification you can have for that is that Mississippi State just beat Kentucky. That's it. I don't know what else about their resume would make you think. Mississippi State lost to an American Athletic Conference team who's not even in the top 4 of their conference. Right. They lost at home to LSU and they lost to Bama by 40. Here's who they've beaten: Louisiana Tech by a point. Right? They beat Mississippi State is ranked with a loss to Memphis, a 1-point loss, a 1-point win over Louisiana Tech. They're ahead of Kentucky, right? And then the other one is Wisconsin ahead of Iowa. Iowa's 6-2, Wisconsin's 5-3, and Wisconsin just beat Iowa. But if you're going to take a 5-3 Big Ten team, why not take Penn State, who beat Wisconsin at Wisconsin in the first game of the season?
Right.
So to me, there was a lot of recency bias in this, and that concerns me because that's something that they have kept out of this for a long time. It's been one of my biggest concerns and issues with the pollsters is they put so much on what just happened this week. The committee's always said we're going to take the whole thing, and when I look at this top 25, Vince, this doesn't look like a group that kind of took the whole thing, with the one exception of having Oregon ahead of Ohio State. That's right. The only one that I look at and say, yeah,
you won that bet, and I give you credit for that. But yeah, I didn't think Oregon was a top. But then again, I didn't think Oklahoma should be 8 or whatever. Right. So I don't. My head is just, I'm scratching my head about so many of these things in here. That because Oklahoma got bumped down, that bumped up Ohio State and Oregon. It just.
I don't know how a 1-loss Michigan team, like, so literally you're ranking Michigan ahead of Oklahoma because they have a good loss. Well, Oklahoma's got to be saying, well, sorry for not losing. Sorry that we won all our games. I mean, it makes no sense. It makes no sense.
And Cincinnati people should be ecstatic right now that they're 6 if they're going to put Oklahoma 8. Right. I mean, I'm just saying in relation to
the one thing that they're going to say about Cincinnati is at least they have the win over Notre Dame. But see, then that's another troubling thing because to me, I don't think you can, because the guy said, well, who have they beaten since then? So basically what he said is they're 6 because they beat Notre Dame. Okay, but in Oklahoma, I would argue that obviously Cincinnati's got a better win than Oklahoma. Yes, but I think you could argue that the next 3 or 4 wins that Oklahoma has, 2 or 3 at least, are better than the wins that
every other win that they have.
That Cincinnati has. So
Cincinnati's entire resume is Notre Dame right now. It's the entire
Right.
resume, right? I
Right.
mean,
And if you're going to say that, then you should put Notre Dame up higher. If they're that good,
right,
they can
right.
build Cincinnati's entire resume, then they should be up higher. Although I don't have any issue with Wake Forest and being ahead of Notre Dame. And I don't have a problem with Michigan
I
being
don't
ahead
either.
of Notre Dame because I said in my poll today, when we did our show today, I had Michigan ahead of Notre Dame.
Right.
Couple quick things. Mark Hoffer with a super chat. Mark, thank you so much for that. He says, I hate when teams run up the score, but I agree that that's what it would take to get Notre Dame into the college football playoff. Brian and Vince, you're the best. Thank you very much for the super chat and the kind
Thanks,
words,
Mark.
Mark. I want to be clear, though. I am not advocating on running up the score. What I'm advocating for is playing for 60 minutes, okay? Running up the score to me is being up 49-0 and running a play action bomb or a reverse or some sort of trick play, a double pass or faking a punt or something like that. That's running up the score.
Yeah.
Putting your backups in the game and saying, hey, let's go score and letting that guy throw or doing like that. That to me isn't running up the score. The job, here's the thing, it's about a mentality. If I put my offense on the field, and whether it's a second or third string, and I'm not calling plays that are designed for them to have success, then what mindset am I establishing in those younger players?
I agree.
If I'm just handing off left and handing off right, I know you agree because we've definitely talked about this. But to me, you put them in the game. It's the other team's job to stop them. It's not your job to stop your own offense.
Right.
It's their job to stop your offense. And so that's what I'm referring to, Mark. And again, I'm not a big fan of running the score up, like calling timeouts to get a score. No, I'm not.
No,
I'm not doing
that's
that.
running up the score.
Yeah. Like if you're driving and it's 42-10 and your second string is driving and you complete a pass and the clock is winding down, I'm not calling the timeout to get a field goal.
Right.
If you guys don't hustle up and get the play off, then we don't score again, right? Those are things that you don't do. But letting them run the 2-minute offense is not, they need that opportunity.
Right.
So that's the difference. We have another super chat down here I want to get to before we get to some more of these things. Daniel Wade says with the super chat, thank you for that. I kept looking for SMU's placement based on what you said, Brian, in relation to UC would be ranked. To
Big
you
Oaks.
both, Cincinnati, yeah. To your point, Daniel, what we talked about for people who didn't watch the show earlier, we said we're going to know about the committee's desire to get a group of 5 team in based on how they place SMU and Houston. And the fact that SMU and Houston were not ranked at 7-1, and you have a team like Fresno State ranked in the top 25 at 7-2, to me says a lot about who they're trying to hype up. Well, Oregon has a win over Fresno State, right? Okay, so that's a team they're trying to pump up. They're not trying to pump up Oklahoma. They're not trying to pump up Cincinnati. Fresno State lost on the road to Oregon. Fresno State also lost to Hawaii. They have a 2-point win over Nevada, and they have a 17-0 win over Wyoming. They beat UNLV by 8.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so how is Fresno in, but SMU and Houston are not? That's kind of the thing that kind of made me scratch my head a little bit. And I get having San Diego State in there, but San Diego State's, again, here's what San Diego State has done this year. They beat New Mexico State by 18, Utah by 2, it's a good win, Arizona by 24, good win. They beat Towson. They beat New Mexico by 24. They beat San Jose State by 6, Air Force by 6, and then lost by 10 at home to Fresno. So how is that resume more impressive than what Houston or SMU have done? Because SMU's only losses to Houston. Houston's only losses the first game of the year. So just a lot of – so to me, it tells me the committee has no desire to have Cincinnati in the playoff.
Yeah, none.
No desire. And I'm not against it because I don't think you should pump up an American Athletic Conference team if they don't deserve it.
Yeah, right.
If they don't deserve it. If Cincinnati would have gone out and blown out Navy and blown out their last couple teams and not struggled so much against, Indiana – they would probably be in a different place right now. But he was right in what he said. They're not playing well right now, and I can't really fault him for that because I agree with it. My issue with what he said wasn't
the president of the committee or whatever. Okay.
Holcutt, as I think his name is.
Okay.
I don't have an issue. I don't disagree with what he's saying. My concern with what he said was it's reeked of recency bias. That was my issue.
Yeah.
Right. And then when you have some other things in it. So that was a bit of a head scratcher for me. Marky Stewart with a super chat. Thank you, Mark. My focus for Notre Dame is to simply go 11-1, win our bowl game, and play and develop our young talent. I get all that, Mark, but this is Notre Dame, and you're in the top 10. You should, if you're not playing for a championship, why are you coaching and playing at Notre Dame?
Right.
You know,
he didn't say the bowl game couldn't have been in the playoff, though. He didn't say that.
Right. And if they get to a bowl game, here's the thing, Mark. Like if Notre Dame goes 11-1 and gets to a bowl game and they don't make it to the playoff because they did everything in their power to get there and it just wasn't good enough, so be it.
Exactly.
But what I'm not going to be okay with is if you don't do what you need to do and get to a bowl game and say, boy, if you would have done this, this, and this.
Yeah, what you have in your control. If you're not maximizing your effort with what you can control, and the only thing Notre Dame can control right now is how they play against the opponents that they face on the field. That's the only thing they can control. They can't control what happens to Michigan State and Ohio State and all those different things. They can't control any of that, but they can control what they do on the field. And if they're going to be okay and satisfied with 3-point wins, they're not doing everything that they can to try to get into the playoff, and they will be satisfied with an 11-1 and a New Year's 6 game and potential win or loss there, right? So that I think that's what you're saying, right? I mean, it's if you're not doing everything that's in your control, because there's so much Notre Dame cannot control about this,
right?
There's so much
because of the way that they played against Cincinnati,
right? You have to go 6 spots. That means a lot of things have to happen for you to get into that Final Four. And somebody in the chat asked me if I see a road for the Irish getting into the playoff. There's a road.
They're number 10. Yeah,
it's very crowded right now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a road. It's crowded, and there's things that need to happen that Notre Dame has no control over. Right. And it could happen. That's all I'm saying. Yes, it could happen. There's a road, but it will be difficult.
Right.
It will be difficult.
They're going to need a lot to happen.
Yeah,
but it's there.
100%.
And so my whole thing is you can't control, and this is to Mark's thing, you can't control what other teams do.
Correct.
You can't control this team upsetting that team, but what you can control is you can control you going out there and you just taking it to your opponents.
Absolutely.
Because that's also a mindset that's going to take you into the next one. And you talk about developing your young talent. That's a mindset that I need to see developed in the younger players.
It's
if
more than just
compete
extra
for a championship
practices
next
for
year.
bowl games. It's more than that. Yeah.
Because you need that mentality for next season. Because you have to, as a coach, say, hey, we have to at least have a mindset of how can we get ourselves in with a loss?
Yeah.
And the way you do that is go out there and smack people beyond what they've done. And it's not about running up the score. It's about developing an aggressive, I'm coming after you mentality that Notre Dame has never had under Brian Kelly, ever. And that's one of those final things that needs to change, in my opinion. So we have another super chat from Kay Grant. Thank you for that, Kay Grant. It is, we have a lot of football left. The rankings will change every week. We know that. But we're not going to wait till the end just because there's a lot of football left, right? Otherwise, we might as well just not talk about anything.
Yeah.
The next few weeks are going to be a lot of fun to watch. That I agree with.
That's a fact.
This is going to be a fun month of November.
That is a fact.
I cannot wait for that. And then, of course, the best part of what he said. Go Irish.
Yeah, man.
Got a couple more down here that I want to get to and we're going to get back to some more of our thoughts on this, Vince, because it was a wild one. Sean Lucero, do the initial rankings give us insight who might get matched up with the New Year's 6 game? What matchup would you want to see or not see? Love the show. Sean, thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Sean.
I don't think so because of –
not yet.
And the reason I say that is not – yes, that's a great one, but not yet.
Yeah.
Because so many of those teams that are ranked are have to play each other.
Right.
And so – you know, you could say, well, if Oklahoma gets upset by Oklahoma State or Baylor, you know, what kind of setup could that be? You know, like you take Oregon and Ohio State out because you're not going to play either one of them unless you're in the playoff, right? Because whichever one of those two, if one doesn't get in, they're going to be in the Rose Bowl,
right?
Then you look at it and say, okay, if Ohio State's in the playoff, then you're not getting Michigan. Because Michigan's, you know, or Michigan State, one of those two is going to be in the Rose Bowl, right? Then, you know, maybe you get one of them in another New Year's 6. So, I mean, there's just so much that has to happen.
Right.
I don't think they would. A lot of people want to get Cincinnati again. I don't think that they would put Cincinnati against Notre Dame.
I
wouldn't mind it, though. I really wouldn't mind it. I wouldn't mind it.
To be honest with you, that might be my top one to be. Yeah. I mean, if I'm thinking about the potential for, you know, who you could face in a New Year's 6. Because right now they've positioned Cincinnati to not make the Final Four.
They don't want Cincinnati in the playoff.
Yeah, let's be real clear on that. That's what I took out of this first ranking. Even though I had Cincinnati 6 when we were talking this afternoon, and that's exactly where the committee had them. I don't think the committee wants them in there. So
no,
they're setting them up.
You don't want them in there.
Well, I don't either, but I'm saying
exactly why you guys are on the same page.
Yeah, I agree with them. But it's set up for a possibility, but I don't know that they really dig rematches. I think that they would try to avoid rematches, to be honest with you. But for me personally, I would love to get another crack at Cincinnati.
But you know what they want? They want money.
Sure.
And that storyline would be a great bold matchup.
That's a really good point.
Right?
Like a Fiesta Bowl or something like that.
Or one of those. Yes, that would be a money-making storyline. No, Cincinnati looking for payback against Notre Dame, who they beat, or that'd be a great storyline.
It really would.
Paul McConnell with a super chat. Thank you very much for that, Paul. Appreciate you. Paul. Very, very much. So, Vince, my thoughts on this thing are not over yet. I have a lot more thoughts on this.
I know you do.
Alabama at number 2 is a friggin' joke. That is a joke.
I want to talk about recency bias.
People talking about, people talking about like they're going to get the benefit of the doubt. I agree, but they shouldn't. That is an absolute. Give me a break.
They shouldn't be 2.
Michigan State's got a better win than Alabama, right? Alabama's best win is what? Number 16 Ole Miss. And then they also beat number 17 Mississippi State, right? A 3-loss team. After that, so they've got 2 wins over top 25 teams, correct?
Yes.
Michigan State only has 1, but they beat number 7, right?
Right there.
Yeah, I knew Bama was going to be in the top 4. I knew that over undefeated teams. I knew that. But
I had him at 3. I had him 3.
Yeah,
but I just it all comes back. It all comes to the Oklahoma thing. Like, how are they better than Oklahoma right now?
How are they better than Michigan State?
Right. Agreed.
Michigan State's got a better resume than Oklahoma does.
No question.
So to me, normally, some of the stuff I heard from ESPN people like Kirk Herbstreit talking about, it was so funny. He just can't hide. He used to be really good at hiding his Ohio State bias, but Ohio State fans just crushed him so much. I think he's afraid to not be biased now.
Yeah, right.
Which is kind of ridiculous.
It is.
But his comments about, I know Oregon's offensive coordinator almost died before the game and he didn't coach in their only loss, but Stanford really sucks. Okay. How are you just going to dismiss that, right? Nobody talked about the fact that Kayvon Thibodeau did not play against Ohio State. Oregon didn't have 2 of their 3 best defensive players in that game.
Right.
And still beat them convincingly. So it was just kind of funny how they dismissed that. But the one thing that they said, the one conspiracy type of thing that was said that I agree with was said by, I believe, Joey Galloway, who said them placing Bama 2 is them setting up Bama to stay in with a close loss to Georgia in the SEC title game.
I absolutely agree with that. Absolutely agree with it. And I was going to say that once we started talking about them a little bit more. I absolutely agree with that. They are completely setting up Alabama to be a 2-loss team in the Final 4. Yeah. And to keep Georgia in as well.
If Alabama wins out, right?
Correct.
Let's say they beat Auburn, they beat the team LSU, the teams that they're supposed to play. And they play the number 1 team in the country toe-to-toe for 4 quarters and Georgia wins by a field goal late. How do you drop them 3 spots out of the top?
Right. Yeah.
That was my issue, right? So they're clearly setting that up.
Yeah,
I'm a little shocked by the Big Ten West hype that we saw.
They love
it. There were just as many Big Ten West teams in the top 25 as Big Ten East teams. That made no sense to me. I didn't get that one at all.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, how are those teams in? How is Wisconsin in over Penn State? If you're going to put all this emphasis on head-to-head and all this kind of stuff, Penn State, here's the thing. Penn State has 2 wins over top 25 teams in the because they also beat Auburn. So Penn State has a win over let me pull this up here. They have a win over number 13 Auburn, a game they controlled for 6. They had to lead the whole game. They have a loss in a game against number trying to pull these things back up. I'm just going to put this over on my other screen. I got 2 monitors, and I'm not taking advantage.
Yeah.
Penn State lost a game at number 22 Iowa by 3 in a game where they were up 17-3 when their starting quarterback got hurt. And then they just lost a competitive game that was a legit 4-quarter game to Ohio State, and they beat Wisconsin, another top 25 team.
Mm-hmm.
How are they not, like, what's Wisconsin's resume built on? That Wisconsin beat the number 22 team, right? I mean, how are you going to have them in and not Penn State if you want to put a 5-3 Big Ten team? I don't think either one of them should be in the top 25.
I agree with you. I don't think either one of them should be in either. I would put help me out here. The team from the American down
either
in Dallas.
Houston or SMU, pick one.
SMU,
yeah.
Dallas.
Either one of them.
Yeah, I would have them in before I would have Wisconsin in.
I would have Texas San Antonio in before I would have Wisconsin. I mean, they're undefeated. And again, if you can say, well, they haven't played anybody. Well, you had BYU in the top 25 last year when they played a schedule that was just as bad. So, I mean, UTSA, and here's the thing, UTSA has a win over Illinois.
Right.
They beat Illinois on the road. They beat Memphis. They beat Western Kentucky on the road. How are they not in the top 25?
Right.
They're 8-0. And they've got a Power 5 win and an AAC win. So there was a lot of like, wow. Like I said, this is the first time that I just had as much seriously.
Right.
Like when I saw the first one, I was like, wow, they're going to put UTSA a lot higher than I thought they would. And then they released like 16 to 20, 19 or what would it be 16 to 20. And I'm like, okay, either they're putting UTSA way higher than they should, or they're not going to be in. And I figured it wasn't going to be in. But when I saw 16 through 20, I was like, they don't want Cincinnati in. When I saw there was no, because they definitely weren't going to put Houston or Cincinnati.
They're not helping Cincinnati in any way.
Not at all.
Not in any way. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And they didn't do a whole lot to help Oregon either. But if you kind of look at it, you say, boy, the Pac-12 is just not helping Oregon. I don't know if there's anything for the committee to do. But to hype up the Pac-12 right now.
I agree with that.
Right now.
But they've positioned Oregon, if they continue to win, to stay where they're at. They're not going to drop Oregon, right?
Well, Oregon's going to have to take a page out of the Notre Dame 2015 playbook and do the opposite. Because remember, Notre Dame was in 2015, kept winning until the Stanford, but they dropped out before they lost to Stanford. Yeah. They dropped out after they barely beat Boston College because they had an ugly win over Wake Forest at home.
They're going to have to blow teams out. And they're going to obviously, it would only help them if Michigan State loses to Ohio State, obviously. But yeah, I mean, but the committee has positioned them so that if they start to win and they win big, or continue to win, I should say, and they continue to win, then they're going to stay. I think they're going to stay right where they're at, even without the help of having those other Pac-12 teams in the rankings.
We'll have to see, because if Ohio State goes out, here's the concern that if you're Oregon, if Ohio State blows out Michigan and Michigan State and then blows out the winner of the Big Ten West, because that's what I think they're doing. I think they're setting Ohio State up to jump them. Because
if
that's
they blow
why
out
you've got
State,
the 3.
Michigan State drops, right?
Huh?
If they blow out Michigan State's out of the Final Four.
Right.
Oregon moves up to 3. Right?
Maybe. But Oklahoma's there to jump up too. So here's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
They've got Michigan and Michigan State still left on Ohio State's schedule, right?
Right.
The fact that they put the number 1, 2, and 3 teams in the Big Ten West in the rankings is another example of they're trying to give Ohio State a chance to have a third top 25 win.
The Big Ten championship.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
And if Ohio State does to those teams what Ohio State has a tendency to do in November and blow people out, then they're going to – and honestly, at that point in time, their resume would be better than Oregon's.
I agree.
Because, again, head-to-head can't trump all. It can't, you know?
Right. I agree.
Otherwise, you get into some really weird transitive property type of things, right? Head-to-head has to be a part of it, but it can't be a trump card. You can't do it that way.
If that happens, if Ohio State does what you just said, right? They blow everybody out and they finish with 1 loss, etc. Right? Oregon wins. Let's say they blow everybody out. Okay, so they end up with 1.
That's what they have to do. They have to blow everybody out.
Do that. Yeah. So we know Michigan State would fall. Okay, now Oklahoma, if they win out, they will have wins over the 11 and 12 ranked teams. So
potentially
now
another one if Iowa State can get hot, right?
Now you've got potentially 5 teams to talk about for 4 spots. Right. Now, a lot obviously has to do with what happens when Alabama faces Georgia. But man, I'm very curious.
Georgia's going to have so many fans. Assuming Georgia. See, here's the other thing is Georgia has always been a team prone to have that one regular season game. You're like, what the heck was that?
Sure. And that cannot happen before Alabama game.
And people will look and say, well, their schedule stinks and they don't really play anybody until they get to Alabama. That's true. Missouri, Tennessee, Charleston Southern, and Georgia Tech. Let me just remind people that in 2019, Georgia's only regular season loss was at home to 4-8 South Carolina. Georgia just does that sometimes. You know what I mean, Vince? Like they just have a tendency to have that game where you're like, huh? How'd that happen?
Right.
So if Georgia loses a game, then then you can have it. But if Georgia keeps winning, which I think that they will, there's going to be a bunch of teams just pulling for Georgia to smack Alabama.
Right, because again, the committee putting Alabama 2 is allowing a close loss to keep them in the top 4. And if that and if every scenario works out the way you just said, now you've got 5 teams. Now, if I was the one making the selections, Alabama's 5th or lower, like they're the odd man out in that scenario, right?
What you're talking about in a 2-loss scenario?
If they have 2 losses,
they're not even in my top 6 unless there's other 2-loss teams.
Right, but I'm just saying the way the committee has already positioned them at 2, I'm not sure how far they're going to fall. But if we're having a 5-team discussion and we're talking about an undefeated Georgia, we're talking about a 1-loss Oregon, we're talking about a 1-loss Ohio State, and we're talking about an undefeated Oklahoma, I think those are your 4, whatever order. I don't care.
Yeah.
And Alabama's on the outside looking.
Has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be.
And nobody else has an argument in that scenario.
Cincinnati, I don't even think blowing people out can help Cincinnati. Because if Cincinnati blows out, let's look at Cincinnati's remaining schedule. Okay. The hope that they had, and this is what we talked about before. Thank you for the super chat, K Grant.
Absolutely.
It's Carrie. The hope that they had is they play SMU at home on November 20th. Now, SMU can still get into the top 25.
Sure they can.
Right? I mean, they're not locked out, right? And
we don't know where they
landed
outside the tone. They could be 26.
They could be 26, right? They're not completely locked out. They play at Memphis this weekend, home against Central Florida. If they win the next 2, they could jump in, right? The point being is once Cincinnati beats them, they're going to fall right back out. That's the problem. If they started in the top 25 and then climbed up to like 17 with 2 wins in a row, then when Cincinnati beats them, they're still in the top 25. Same thing with Houston. And now the reason we bring up Houston is because the AAC, who they've lost some teams, they're in the situation that the Big 12 is in. They don't have divisions anymore. It's just the top 2 teams play each other in the Big 12 or the AAC championship.
Okay. It's like
right now, Houston would be because Houston's actually undefeated in the league. Because their only loss so far was to Texas Tech. So if Houston loses one more game, they still have the head-to-head over SMU. And then Cincinnati would beat SMU, and then SMU would be out again, right? Yeah. So right now, unless Houston loses to South Florida, Temple, Memphis, or Connecticut, they'd have to lose 2 of those games. Against, again, South Florida, who's 2-6, Temple, who's 3-5, Memphis, who's okay, and UConn, who is the worst Power 5 team in college. The worst. Not Power 5, the worst.
No, they're the worst
FBS team in college football. The whole thing. I mean, they're awful.
And you could drop them past Division 2, Division 3.
Yeah, I mean, they're an okay top 25 team. I mean, their only win this year, they're 1-8. Their only win was a 6-point win at home over Yale. Okay, and they're getting blown out by people. The only, I mean, it's bad. They got beat by 10 by Holy Cross. They stink. Houston's not losing 2 of those games, in my opinion. They're just they're not. So Houston, to me, is going to be the opponent for Cincinnati. Now, if you're Cincinnati, you got to hope that Houston just rolls, because Houston's the one team that has a chance to get into the top 20. And again, the top 20 is the key, because the top 20 almost ensures that if Houston loses to Cincinnati in impressive fashion, meaning Cincinnati plays really well, if you're in the top 20, you can stay in the top 25.
Yeah.
But the thing that's going to hurt SMU is SMU only has 2 games to even get into the top 25. They're not going to go from unranked to 16 in 2 games before Cincinnati plays them. And Cincinnati has to blow them out. If Cincinnati's going to get into the playoff, they have to blow their next 4 opponents out. They have to. So SMU would fall out.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't help Cincinnati's resume. But Houston's the key for Cincinnati. Houston has to win out, which I think they will. I think Houston's going to be 11-1 when they play Cincinnati. They will have a chance to jump into the top 11. Cincinnati also needs to root for Notre Dame to win and win impressively.
Yeah.
Because if Notre Dame's cracking the top 5, getting into that top 5, 6 conversation, Cincinnati's got to say, hey, look, we beat a top 7, 6, 7 Notre Dame team. We beat a top 25 Houston team. We handled our business. Right. That's the only chance that they have. But, yeah, the AAC got no respect. And you've got 3 lost Big Ten West and SEC West teams in there. And I'm like, come on. Seriously? It's bad. It was, it wasn't good, Vince. It wasn't good. I was also surprised to see 3 ACC teams in. I'm sorry. Yeah. I think the American Athletic Conference is better than the ACC.
ACC's terrible. They're
this
terrible.
Is a bad ACC year. Bad ACC year. And they have 3 ACC teams in the top 25. That surprised me. Right. That surprised me quite a bit. Now, they may not be
Wake, and who was the third?
NC State was at 19.
You're right. Okay.
To me, that was to justify Mississippi State. I think that's what that was. They're in to justify having Mississippi State there because Mississippi State beat NC State.
Mississippi State at 5-3 is ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Look, I guess I kind of don't mind if they were in there at 5-3, but it's 17.
At 17, though, that's what I'm talking about. Like they belong in the 20 to 25 range. I would have Pitt higher than that, to be perfectly honest with you. But that's ridiculous all by itself. Did they really? I'm looking at the chat over here. Did they actually say that everybody in the top 13 had a chance to make the playoff except for Notre Dame?
Who said that?
Here we go, right here. The ESPN show said everyone in the top 13 had a chance to make the playoff besides Notre Dame. And another person mentioned it too. So
I didn't hear that, but it would not shock me at all.
Why would you even, what kind of take is that? Why would you even say that? Well, everybody else has a shot except Notre Dame. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. Well, it's consider the source.
Understandable, but still, that just makes no sense to me. Makes no sense to me.
These guys are talking heads. They don't do real analysis anymore.
You're telling me Auburn at 6-2 has a better chance than Notre Dame does of making it into the Final Four. That's ridiculous.
Yes,
it's ridiculous.
Spark 5213 with a super chat. Thank you for that. He says, "Bingo, they want Alabama in even with 2 losses." I mean, that to me, what it screams. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So we have a couple more. You got the one from Cary Grant for his super chat, correct? And we got one more down here from I think Matt Baisley and here. Okay, so this makes sense. Mark Stewart, thank you for the super chat, Mark. McElroy said it. That makes sense because he's for someone who's supposedly really smart. He says a lot of really stupid things. Matt Baisley, late to the party, but damn it, 2 is such a joke. Bad joke. Michigan State beat CFP 7 last week.
Yeah. I'm 100%.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
Look, I knew the recency bias from the committee couldn't leave Alabama out in the cold, but putting them at 2 is a reach. It's a reach.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can put it. It's a reach. They love Alabama and they love Ohio State. I get it. And they've positioned Ohio State perfectly, obviously, to get in too. Mm-hmm. All they have to do is win the rest of their games, and they're clearly in, right? So they've positioned.
To me,
all
they
those
probably
teams.
should. I mean, if Ohio State wins out, they probably
I don't really
should
have a problem with where Ohio State is.
They just shouldn't be in over Oregon unless Oregon plays like garbage down the stretch. I mean, because if Oregon has a bunch of ugly wins down the stretch, while Ohio State's beating Michigan and Penn State, and then beats that's fine. I mean, I get that, but just right now. They should, because that's the other thing too, is we always have to be open to changing our opinions too as the season unfolds. Right?
Oh yeah.
And that's why we're going to have this show every week, because if something happens, if we go out this weekend and Michigan State loses to Purdue this weekend, well, then this changes a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
You know, it to me, it affects how you view Michigan. Right. So there's a lot that still has to play out, but it was an interesting ranking. BYU at 15 was another one that really surprised me. But I'll say this: I actually respected the fact that they had BYU where they had BYU, and the reason I say that is I know BYU has 2 losses, but their 2 losses they lost to Boise State, which was a bad loss, but then they lost at Baylor. They also have 3 wins over Power 5 teams. 4. They've beaten 4 Pac-12 teams this year. And then a 5th Power 5 win over Virginia. So BYU beat Arizona, beat Utah, beat Arizona State. So they beat Arizona by 8, Utah by 9, Arizona State by 10. They beat Washington State on the road by 2, and then just beat Virginia at home by 17. They have 5 Power 5 wins. And so they got them in with 2 losses. One was to a Power 5 team. So I believe, I'm going to look this up now, but I believe that BYU is ranked higher in the first poll this year
than they were
with 2 losses than they were last year when they were undefeated, which is exactly how it should be. I'm giving the committee props on that one.
Yeah,
because they do have a bunch.
They didn't
of
play
Power
anybody
5
last year because they couldn't. They were boxed out of all the Power 5 teams.
It was not their fault.
No, it wasn't their fault
because they
all.
weren't in the situation where Notre Dame they could play the AAC, and a lot of those other leagues would not do those kind of would not play them. But I'm looking this up because I just want to make sure that where BYU. Yeah, BYU last year they were 1 spot higher. They were 14 last year.
I remember them being the teens. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So this year they were 15 with 2 losses, which again because they played a better schedule. So props to them for that. I'll give the committee a little bit of credit for having Wake Forest in the top 10 because they are undefeated. But I'm curious to see how. I just don't think Wake Forest is going to stay there because they're not going to play anybody down the stretch. Auburn at 6-2 is a really interesting team because
they got a chance to get in. Apparently,
they're actually I know, right? But in defense of his stupid comment, if there's enough chaos,
right,
Auburn could be the 2-loss team that gets in the playoff. I mean, because think about it, Auburn only has 1 SEC loss. They're 6-2. Because one of their losses is the Penn State.
That's true.
So if they win out and they beat Bama, they're playing for the championship against Georgia. Well, they played Georgia already and lost. If they get a rematch win over Georgia, there have to be some other chaos, right? But that could be the scenario where I would be curious to see kind of how that goes. But I'm going to be pulling for Auburn to beat Alabama. I almost always pull for Auburn to beat Alabama. I'm going to be especially doing so this year because I do not want to see Bama get in.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't either.
I'm sick of Bama.
Yeah, I don't either.
That is hilarious that Greg McElroy said that. This is why as soon as the thing was over, as soon as they announced the top 25, I muted it and didn't turn it back on till the president guy was talking.
And I didn't even watch it. So
yeah, that's my fault. I told Vince 7:30, and it was 7. It was 7.
And I'm watching the show with my wife, and whatever. And I'm getting ready to. He's like, "Hey, are you home?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm getting ready to turn on the show." He's like, "Yeah, it's over." I'm like, what? What do you mean?
Yeah. My bad on that.
It's all good.
My bad. Vincent, I'm looking at this. Any other takeaways? This weekend's I want to go through the games this weekend that are going to impact it. But any other takeaways from the top 25? Minnesota at 20 shocked me. That was definitely a pro Ohio State.
But again, they're setting up that Big Ten championship to be something special for Ohio State. That's what that is. The fact that they rode their boat to 20 is ridiculous. But
rode their boat to 20. That's awesome.
Like that.
They lost a freaking Bowling Green.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Right.
Who's Minnesota beating this year? I mean, seriously. Come on. Man. Minnesota at 20 they're 6-2. Who have they beaten? I mean, they lost to Ohio State by 14. They beat Miami of Ohio by 5. Beat Colorado, who stinks. Lost at home to Bowling Green.
Well, they certainly weren't going to Bowling Green, that's for sure.
They beat Purdue by 7, beat Nebraska by 7, beat Maryland by 18. That's a decent win for Maryland's 5-3, and they beat Northwestern. So they're hanging their hat on what?
Northwestern?
What's the win that jumped them up to 20? Maryland, Nebraska, Purdue? I mean, seriously? So they're 20 because it gives Ohio State a better win. it gives them reason to have Ohio State ahead of
Right.
Oklahoma in those teams, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Same thing with Fresno State and Oregon. That was the one win, the one thing where I thought, okay, the Pac-12 was so bad that the committee had to go to Fresno to try to give Oregon a bump. I mean, that's the key there. But any other things, Vince, that you observed from this weekend or from this first installment of the rankings?
No, I think we covered it. I like your take on the propping up Ohio State based on the other division for the Big Ten championship. I think that's so obvious. I even though I think it's absolutely ludicrous that Oklahoma is ranked where they are, but they've got games against the 11 and the 12 team coming up.
Right.
So they're going to be able to go wherever they need to go to get up into the Final Four. So is it outrageous? Yes, but is it going to matter in the end if Oklahoma takes care of their business? No, it's not.
Right. I don't think it will, but starting at 8 is a
tough.
It's a long way to go.
And it's even longer for Notre Dame, right? So, again, is there a path? Yeah, there's a path, but chaos is going to have to ensue. And so,
yes.
and
that's why I want to talk about
Friday.
Yeah. That's why I want to talk about this weekend.
Yeah.
Yes,
right.
Because I want to kind of get into, because there's going to be some crazy stuff going on this weekend. But before we do that, Vince, we do have a couple super chats. David Knight, my guy, have not seen you in a while.
David.
I know you got a move coming up here, buddy, but it's
Welcome
good to
back,
see
brother.
you. You keep drinking water and antibiotics, but I keep coming back. Love you guys. We love you too, man. We haven't seen you in a while, so glad to see you back.
That's exactly like he's some sort of a disease or something.
Yeah,
that's not true.
Well, he's got some traveling coming up here. But it was great to see you, David. And of course, thank you very, very, very much for the super chat,
awesome,
buddy.
man.
We appreciate that very much. Garth Cassidy with the super chat as well, buddy. Appreciate that. I think the only reason they have Bam at number 2 is because that is what Vegas says. Also, what happens if Michigan State wins out? I don't know if Vegas has anything to do with it. I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't believe that to be the case. But again, it's a new committee, so maybe this committee's working with a little bit of a different thought process.
Dynamic.
But if Michigan State wins out, they're in. I mean,
they're in now. Yeah. So if they win out, they're absolutely in.
And all I think what would happen, honestly, is because flipping 2 and 3 doesn't matter because it's still 2 and 3.
You're playing each other, right?
Yeah, and if Georgia and if Michigan State was 2 and 1 out and Bama was 3 and 1 out, they would just flip Bama up to 1 and drop Georgia to 3. They're not going to put Mississippi. They're not going to put Michigan State to 1. And then have Georgia and Bama at 2 and 3 to play each other.
So they can play again. Right? Yeah, exactly.
So, but Vince, this weekend there's some games that are gonna have a really big impact, in my opinion. And I wrote a lot of them down. I mean, there's some bad ones like Ohio State and Nebraska. I mean, that'd be a shocker of all shockers. I'm gonna waste my time on that one. But Wake Forest plays at North Carolina.
Yeah, and North Carolina, by the way, they have scored over 50 points at home. How many times? Like 4 times or 3 times, something like that. They score points at home. And so, and I know that Wake can score. So, I mean, whatever the over-under is, take the over because
they've scored 45, 38, 30, 25, 59, 59 at home. The only time was against Florida State. I'm going to say this too. I think the manner in which North Carolina lost to Notre Dame is either going to cause them to collapse because their schedule's pretty tough down the stretch. North Carolina at 4-4. You've got Wake Forest at home this weekend, at Pitt, and then home against Wofford, then at NC State. So North Carolina is going to end up either running the table and look, if North Carolina wins out, they're going to jump into the top 25 because they're going to have to beat 3 ranked teams to get there.
Right.
Right.
And you're kind of a North Carolina fan at this point because the better they are, the better your resume
Well, plus
looks.
they're going to knock off Wake Forest. So, or the opposite is they're going to be so fired up about the fact that they battled Notre Dame and because they didn't quit. They did not quit against Notre Dame. Look, Notre Dame was the better team that day. Clearly, North Carolina, kind of threatened a couple times, but Notre Dame would answer right back. But I'll give North Carolina a lot of credit. Even when Notre Dame took a 10-point lead late, they battled.
Right.
They kept plugging. They kept fighting. They just ran out of time to get an additional score. Not ran out of time like Dante Williams said USC ran out of time, like to win, but ran out of time to get a score late. Right. So props to them. So if they kind of come into that game fired up, I'll tell you right now, you know what that game's not going to do? What's the over-under on that game? I want to see that right now.
Oh, it's got to be huge.
It's 76. Pound the over.
Take the over.
Take the heck out of the over on that one.
By the way,
okay?
This is the first time Brian has ever given betting advice.
In the last. But, 76, that's 39-37 score.
Yeah.
Do you not remember what the score of what last year's game was? And those teams had better defenses last year. Right, I think they scored a combined 100 points last year. Well, let me find this. I'm dead serious. Let's see what the score was last year when these two teams played. It was 59-53 when these two teams played at North Carolina last year. 59-53.
Yeah.
Pound the over. Okay.
Yeah.
We got a super chat here from Kay Grant. Another one. Thank you, Carrie. You both think Greg McElroy said that because he wants Notre Dame to join a conference. Do you think Notre Dame will join a conference in the near future if Notre Dame goes 11-1 and misses the playoffs? I'd rather stay independent personally. Go Irish. Two things. Number one, I don't think he's that deep. I don't think he has like when it comes to thoughts on Notre Dame. I'm not saying Greg McElroy is not deep intellectually. He is a pretty smart guy in life. He just offers consistently bad takes on ESPN, right? But I don't think he's like deep in the weeds, like, okay, I'm going to say this because Notre Dame needs to join a conference. And if he is saying he's just jumping on somebody's bandwagon, he hasn't really thought it through. Okay.
Right. Agreed on that one.
I think he's saying it because he has an anti-Notre Dame bias, and he's always had an anti-Notre Dame bias. Right. And you know me, Vince, I don't throw that around a lot to just anybody because it's lazy.
It is lazy.
For him, it's clear. I mean, he clearly doesn't like Notre Dame for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe he couldn't get into Notre Dame. I honestly have no clue why he doesn't like Notre Dame.
But that comment today, it's
silly.
Right there. It's right
silly.
there.
It's silly.
It's a clear bias.
Silly. If you think a 2-loss Auburn team has a better shot at getting in on number one Notre Dame team, I don't know what to tell you.
It's a clear bias.
Right. I don't know what to tell you. As far as Notre Dame joining the conference go 11-1, no, because I think Notre Dame looks at their schedule this year and says, yeah, our schedule is bad.
And they will also say that we don't deserve to be in because of who we lost to.
We lost by 11 at home to Cincinnati. Right. And that's the thing that ticks me off. If Notre Dame beats Cincinnati, they're at worst 4.
I agree because
I think they would be
Cincinnati.
4. I think Michigan State would be ahead because Michigan State would have a better win because Cincinnati would be like 10-15.
Yeah, right? No, I agree with that. Yeah,
I think Notre Dame would be in the top 4 right now with a schedule that they're just going to pound everybody in front of.
Yeah, because I think they would be above Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think they'd be above Oregon.
Yeah, I agree. At worst, they'd be 5.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. But I think they'd be in the top 4, which is, again, there's another reason why. How the heck do you lose to frickin' at home to Cincinnati? Give me a break.
Dude, it's embarrassing is what it is. And Notre Dame fans should be happy with wherever Notre Dame ends up because of that.
Yeah.
I don't know how else. You can't blame us for having rose-colored glasses on because Notre Dame deserves where they're at. They just do.
Well, we said 8-10, and I'd have been happy with any of those. Right? I actually would have been more surprised with 8 than I am with 10.
Yeah.
Tommy Guns. Thank you for the super chat, Tommy. Thanks, Tommy. Someone else mentioned it. Need a Notre Dame cheering guy for the next couple of weeks. Brian, put out weekly, please. Talked about that earlier today, and I talked about it earlier. I will have that every Friday. It's going to be a Notre Dame. Who to root for. Yeah, if you're a Notre Dame fan that wants Notre Dame to be in the college football playoff, I'm going to have it. Hey, here's the games that matter. It'll be
one of my favorite articles once we get to the college football playoff.
Yeah, and it's twofold. One is here's the Notre Dame opponents, right? That you need to, you need
keep an eye on
this team to win, that team to win, to jump. And you're going to look if you're a Notre Dame fan, you go Badgers. If you're a Notre Dame fan, right?
Yeah.
If you're a Notre Dame fan, and you look at North Carolina and you see that they got 3 ranked opponents coming down the stretch. Hey, go Heels, kind of thing. All that. I'll have all that, So if Notre Dame's going to make the playoff, here's the games this particular week. So North Carolina beating Wake is an example of one because number one, it gives Notre Dame's strength of schedule a jump, right? And then it knocks Wake Forest out. Right. It knocks the ACC completely out. I mean, ACC is done at that point in time.
Yep.
So which we've already talked about. But yeah, I'll have all that, Tommy, and I'll try to look ahead to it as well. So it's not like just picking – I want this team to lose this week. Sometimes it's I want this team to win this week because I need them to lose to this team 2 weeks from now, kind of thing. Also, so it's like it's fun to do.
Mind.
It's fun to do. Well, hey, I learned from the best in that regards, right?
That's a fact. I just have this vision of like a bulletin board up in your room with like all this the yarn, like going all different directions.
Yeah. Channeling my inner loose emoji.
Seriously.
Yes. Matt Koistra says, hope to see a ton of upsets this Saturday. Great show. Go Irish and Astros. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm pulling for the Braves.
I can't
I'm
root
sorry.
for the Astros. Sorry, man.
I'm sorry. I can't do it. I'm a Reds fan. And I'm an older Reds fan. So, I mean, I grew up when the Astros and Reds were both in the National League West.
Exactly.
So, the Nolan Ryan, Mike Scott days, so I can't do it. I can't do it. And I mean, we can talk about too how Bill Doran's only World Series ring came when he finally went to the Reds in '90, not with the Astros, but that's a different conversation for a different day. All right, Doug Lopachin, can you reveal Nwakpa's intention? Also, wasn't Drake going to commit tonight? I love you guys. I love chaos, but Hamilton needs to play in the Virginia game.
That's
a couple things on that. I don't know Nwakpa's intention. I talked about it in an earlier show. I think I like where Notre Dame is at right now, but they got to close, right? Iowa and Ohio State are going to be tough to beat. Drake is going to commit tomorrow night to either Notre Dame, Clemson, or Auburn. We will carry that show live at 9 p.m. Eastern. And we love you too. And we love chaos as well.
Yeah.
And not just because it helps Notre Dame, but it just makes football so much more fun.
Exactly. It makes these kind of shows fun. Like if everything was exactly the way we would have predicted it to be.
Okay,
hey, everybody, what's going on?
Georgia's 1, Bama's 2, Clemson's 3, and Ohio State's 4. See you guys in 2022.
Yeah, right. That's boring. Boring.
And that's the thing. No Clemson. I mean, they shouldn't have been there, but it just kind of hit home about how bad their season has been.
Feels good.
It does, but it's also kind of still kind of weird, And then Hamilton needs to play in the Virginia game. Yes, I agree.
Agreed, but we don't have to hear about the stupid pizza party that they have on selection night. Like all that is gone, and I'm very happy about
You're
that.
A Clemson hater. I don't understand that. I don't understand that. I like Clemson.
I don't not like Clemson. It's just it got old for me.
Yeah. Hey, you're also a northern guy, so when you hear southern accents, I think you kind of get tired.
Hey, we're having a pizza party. Get on the other bus.
I like Clemson because they are not a traditional powerhouse. So.
I remember when Dabo was hired, right? And he was like an assistant coach, and he was hired, and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, that's be kind of fun, I think he's a good rah-rah guy, and I loved his shtick and the whole thing. It wore me down. It wore me down.
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
Southern bias. Thomas Tartaron says this is an obvious argument for an 18 field. I strongly disagree with that. I think an 18 team field would make this conversation a lot less fun.
Yeah, because there wouldn't be as much controversy.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, this team's in, that team's in, that team's in, and that team's in, right? So, okay, all right. Bama could go lose to Georgia, and they're still going to be in.
Yeah,
I think again, 4-12 is the way I want to go, and my stance. I want to go 4. Keep it at 4, but change the bowl. But that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah, that's a whole other show.
Here's some more really interesting games for this weekend for in relation to this. Obviously, if Liberty upsets Ole Miss, that kind of shakes up the resumes for some of those teams, but that's not going to happen. Can Illinois pull off another upset at Minnesota? That we'll see. Here's where it starts. Michigan State at Purdue. There's a lot of people talking to me about Purdue pulling off the upset. I don't see it. I'd love to see it. My stance on Jeff Brom, but I just don't see it. But that you talk about the shock waves. You talk about the shock because then what do you do with Michigan State at that point in time? Right. And then what does that then do to Michigan's ranking if Michigan State drops down? And then you run into a scenario where if Michigan State loses to a team like Purdue, there's now a chance that the Big Ten ends up with nobody. Hear me out. Alabama wins out, barely beats Georgia. Georgia wins out till they get to Bama. 2 SEC teams are in. Okay? Oregon wins out. Oklahoma wins out. Purdue beats Michigan State. Michigan State beats Ohio State. Ohio State beats Michigan. There's no Big Ten team in the playoff. It's happened before, right? Happened before, so it'll be very interesting. Did I lose you, Vince? I don't think Vince can hear me anymore. So Vince has lost his sound. All right, so we've got some more here. Here's an interesting one. Number 11, Oklahoma State at West Virginia. West Virginia is only 4-4, but West Virginia is a team that's played kind of decent football lately. They have won 2 games in a row. They beat TCU by 12 at TCU. And then they also beat Iowa State. Iowa State had jumped back into the top 25, and West Virginia knocked them right back out. So that was an interesting one. So Oklahoma State at West Virginia is one because that like Oklahoma is you're not going to find a fan base that's going to be more excited about what Oklahoma State does than Oklahoma. Oklahoma Sooner fans are going to be cheering for the Cowboys for the next however many weeks until they play, right? Bedlam. Isn't that what they call that one? Isn't that one called Bedlam? It's one of my favorite series as well.
I think so.
And here's another one. Baylor at TCU. It's the same thing I've said about USC and other teams. Once you fire a coach, you're going to go one of two directions. Either the team's going to collapse because there's no direction, or it's like, hey, we got nothing else to play for, and we rally. And TCU's been competitive. Auburn at Texas A&M is going to be interesting. I don't know how much of an impact because I don't think the loser drops very much just because the way they hype up the SEC West. Here's one, Vince. Number 17 Mississippi State at Arkansas. You know what's going to happen with this one, right? If Arkansas beats Mississippi State drops down and they just jump Arkansas back to where Mississippi State
they'll just flip. Whoop.
That's it.
Yeah.
They'll jump into like 19 and Mississippi State will fall out. Here's another one. NC State at Florida State. Because if you're Notre Dame, see what the committee did, in my opinion, we didn't talk about this. The one thing I think the committee did is they gave Wake Forest a path that Wake Forest doesn't necessarily deserve. And here's what I mean by that. Putting NC State at 19 doesn't just help Mississippi State. It also helps Wake Forest because Wake Forest has to play NC State in 2 weeks.
Right. So it'll be another ranked opponent for them.
Right. If Clemson keeps winning, don't be shocked to see Clemson jump into the back of the top 25. Clemson's 5-3. They play at Louisville and Connecticut. If Clemson's 7-3, the way this season has gone, they're going to jump into the top 25.
Sure. They'll be in that 20 to 25 range. For sure.
And then Pitt being 25, in my opinion, is a boost for them as well because Pitt is 6-2 at 25. Pitt plays Duke this weekend. They play North Carolina at home, Virginia at home, at Syracuse. Pitt Pitt could lose some of those games, but Pitt could also win every single one of those games. Do you know what happens if Pitt wins all those games? Pitt plays Wake Forest in the ACC championship.
Oh, yeah.
But they play Wake Forest in the ACC championship.
Yeah, you're right.
So they're giving Wake Forest a path. So Pitt. So that's a very interesting one for me. But NC State is one of those as well. If NC State loses to Florida State this weekend, they've got to be out at that point in time, which takes away a good win for a good potential future win for Wake Forest. Tennessee at Kentucky will be an interesting one. Oregon at Washington's the other one. Oregon is now in a stage of, and I think their coaches know it, and it looked like it this weekend. Mario Cristobal is at a stage now where he knows it's not enough to just win. There's not a single Pac-12 team other than us ranked.
Right.
We can't just win.
Yeah, not even ranked.
We have to destroy people.
Right.
But at Washington's playing a little bit better. They got a win over Stanford this past weekend at Stanford, so that'll be an interesting one. And there is going to be an upset at some point in time this season, Vince, that we just don't see coming. Purdue could be it, but here's one we're not talking about. Indiana at Michigan. I don't have any clue how Michigan is going to react to the loss to Michigan State.
Well, they're coached by a crazy person, so that doesn't help.
And Indiana got blown out by Ohio State.
Yeah.
But they battled Michigan State, lost by 5. Lost at Maryland by 3. Competed relatively well against Purdue and battled Cincinnati pretty well. Indiana's not that good this year, but they're also not as bad as their 2-6 record indicates.
I agree with that.
If Michigan sleepwalks through this game, what happens? That's something I'm very interested. Or if they're not emotionally ready,
is it in Bloomington?
It's at Michigan.
Okay.
Which to me makes them even more dangerous because when you're at home, you tend to, against a bad team, you tend to overlook them a little bit. Right. So there's going to be an upset here in the next 2 weeks that we just don't see coming. I'm not predicting that it's going to be Indiana, but my point is Michigan is one of those teams that to me seems a little ripe for an upset based on what happened this past weekend.
I'd be okay.
And so that's kind of where I'm looking at it. So those are some of the games from this weekend, Vince, that I think are going to have, that are going to certainly impact Notre Dame. So Wake Forest at North Carolina is obviously a big one because the biggest thing for Notre Dame is just the teams in front of you to lose. I mean, that's
right.
That's the biggest part. Oklahoma's off this weekend, and then Michigan State at Purdue. I think those are probably the two biggest. And then, of course, Oklahoma's only 2 spots ahead of Notre Dame, which is just insane to me. If Oklahoma State loses at West Virginia's won a couple games in a row now. And if Baylor loses at TCU, all of a sudden those opportunities for Oklahoma to get impressive wins are out. Yeah, and then NC State at Florida State. So those are the games this weekend, Vince, that I'll have my eye on the most as we look at Notre Dame. So any of those games that stand out the most to you? You got any upset calls for this weekend, Vince?
I honestly kind of like Purdue this weekend. And
you said that to me on yesterday when we did the college football roundup show.
Yeah, I don't know why. To that. I don't know why, but I like Purdue. That would be my biggest upset, obviously.
By far. Pretty big one. Yeah,
that'd be a big.
I mean, one. Purdue's a good team, but still, it's like.
I know.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying is it would be a big upset. Like I'm saying is like Purdue's a good team, but I don't think anyone like what's the line on that one? I bet you it's double digits. Although, but I always get that wrong. Every time I think that I understand Vegas, I'm quickly realize that I don't.
We don't work there
at
all.
It's a 3-point spread.
3.
Wisconsin, yes, Michigan State's getting 3.
Hey.
Wow.
Boilers plus 3, baby.
Very interesting.
Bang the drum.
And Notre Dame's at 20.5 now. So that Oklahoma State's getting 3 at West Virginia, and then Baylor's getting 6.5 at TCU. And then Texas A&M's getting 4.5 at home against Auburn. Auburn is playing really good football right now. And I still am not a believer in Texas A&M. I think they've had some fluky wins. And then Arkansas is getting 5 at home against Mississippi State, which I find very interesting. And then I know I don't like Northwestern, but I would love to see Iowa lose at Northwestern.
Great.
I really would. I can't stand this Iowa team. I don't know what it is. I normally like Iowa. Like they're normally one of those teams I kind of like to win.
Well, and then that would bump them out too.
There's just something about this Iowa team I don't like. I don't know what it is.
Who does Wisconsin have this weekend?
Wisconsin's got Rutgers at Rutgers, who's not terrible, but they're not.
It could happen, but I'm no.
Well, the thing about Wisconsin is their offense is just so bad you just never know.
And I've underestimated Wisconsin a few different times, and they've I underestimated them against Iowa, and they blew Iowa out.
Yeah, it was not a close game.
No, it wasn't. It was unfortunate.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway,
Rutgers is coming off a win over Illinois, but then they lost to Northwestern, lost to Michigan State, lost to Ohio State, lost to Michigan, beat Delaware, beat Syracuse, beat Temple.
Garth Cassidy's on my side.
Yeah,
Michigan State can't defend.
They really can't,
and he's right.
They really can't.
They are incredibly bad in the secondary.
They really are.
Compared to how good they are running the ball, they're that much worse trying to defend the pass.
They really don't have a lot of talent on defense.
It could be a shootout.
And that's where you and Garth are coming from, is because one thing Purdue can do is they can throw the football pretty good.
And if they can keep the ball out of the hands of that offense and keep Walker on the sideline, I'm just saying.
Well, and having Xander Horvath back helps them too.
Oh, for sure.
Because now they have him and King Doru both healthy.
Yeah.
And they're just a better offense. And honestly, I was disappointed in Jeff Brom last week against Nebraska, because they were putting Nebraska away, and they had a 3rd and 1 and a 4th and 1, and he ran the ball up the middle both times, or off tackle both times. And I'm like, dude, you can't run the ball.
Right.
Like, so what are you doing? You got David Bell in a 1-on-1. Give him a shot.
Right. And thanks, Garth, for that super chat, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But getting Xander Horvath back helps, in my opinion, because he's played 3 games this year, and they scored 30, 49, and then 28 at Nebraska in those 3 games. In the 5 games in between him playing, and again, he doesn't play, but I just think he's a big physical back. I mean, he had 11 carries for 24 yards against Nebraska, but you at least have to respect that he's back there. In the 5 games in between, they scored 13, 13, 13, 24, and 13. In the 3 games with him, 30, 49, and 28.
Yeah. Right. No, no doubt.
So, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a very, very interesting game. So that's going to do it, Vince. That's going to do it for tonight's show. Appreciate everyone being here with us. Yeah, it was. I love these kind of things because we get to have some fun. We get to be have some passion and get a little fired up and call ESPN out. And I always enjoy those things.
Just check.
Yep. Here we go. Kevin Woolard says Michigan State beats Ohio State, taking them out, and then Ohio State in turn beats Michigan and takes them out. That would be what, after Michigan State loses to Purdue, right? So that would be, and then Penn State knocks off Michigan State just to make sure that they don't get that one loss team. That would be, you want to know what chaos would look like in the Big Ten? That's it right there.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, K. Grant. Appreciate you. Another super chat. Appreciate that very much.
That's a 4?
4. He gave a sticker on one of them.
You're a better counter than I am. Good job.
Yeah. Well, I was quarterback, you're a receiver. You just see ball, catch ball.
Yeah, exactly.
But the utter chaos in the Big Ten would be Michigan State gets upset by Purdue.
Right.
And then Michigan State then beats Ohio State. Ohio State beats Michigan. Penn State beats Michigan State. That's utter chaos in the Big Ten. Yeah. Yeah. Chaos in the Big 12 would be everybody that Oklahoma has to play loses.
Yeah, right.
And then Oklahoma loses their rematch against whoever they beat
in the championship
title game. Right.
Yeah,
so they beat Baylor, beat Oklahoma State, and then they replay one of those teams in the title game and lose.
There's your path, right?
Yeah.
There.
I mean, that at least for those two conferences. So it's going to be a fun November, folks. I can't wait for it. We'll be back tomorrow at 12:30 Eastern in the afternoon. We're going to talk about our Navy matchup tomorrow night, 9 o'clock tomorrow night. Don't forget Drake Bowen is going to have his commitment announcement. He's going to decide between Notre Dame.
Right.
He's going to announce his decision between Notre Dame, Clemson, and Auburn. Big one for Notre Dame. They got to win this one, right? In-state kid, 5-star athlete, 2023 class. We're going to talk about that. So we'll be there to have his show or have his announcement. We'll try to have that up. And then we will also talk about whatever the reaction, whether what it means to get him or what they got to do next if they don't get him. So we'll do that tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Thursday, we'll be back to our normal routine. So make sure you hit the like button. Was it smash the like button, right? Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. If you're listening via podcast, give us, please, a 5-star review. We appreciate that. Check out irishbreakdown.com. Sign up for the message board. And we will talk to you all again very, very soon.